It's 2 a.m. and there's a knock at your door. You open it, and two children are standing in the rain. But their eyes, they're completely black. They ask to come inside, but every instinct you have is screaming, don't. Because you know letting them in might be the last mistake you ever make. They call them the black-eyed children. Mysterious kids who appear out of nowhere, always late at night, always asking to be let inside. People who encounter them say it's a feeling like no other, a sense of dread so intense it makes your skin crawl. And those who have let them in, well, no one knows exactly what happens after that. This is the story of one such encounter. It was shared by a man named Jake, who experienced something no one should ever have to. He lives in a small, isolated town, the kind where the nights are so dark you can't see your own hand in front of your face. He thought it would be just another quiet night, but he was wrong. It all started with that knock on the door, slow, deliberate, like someone tapping their fingers against the wood. Jake ignored it at first, thinking it was just the wind. But the knocking continued, persistent, growing louder. He finally got up, muttering to himself about pranksters, and made his way to the door. But when he opened it, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. There, in the pouring rain, stood two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 10. They were dressed in strange, old-fashioned clothes, like something you'd see in a black and white photograph. The boy wore a buttoned-up coat, the girl a dress that looked 2 sizes too big. But what really unsettled Jake was their faces. They were pale, expressionless, lips slightly parted as if they were whispering something he couldn't quite hear. Before he could say anything, the boy spoke, his voice unnaturally calm. "We're lost. Can we come in?" There was no emotion, no fear of being out in the cold. The girl echoed the same words. "Please, sir, let us in." Jake felt his pulse quicken. There was something about them that made him instinctively step back. It wasn't just their words. It was the way they said them. Flat, mechanical, like they were reciting lines. He noticed they never once looked directly at him until they did. And when they did, he saw their eyes. They were completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless darkness. His breath caught in his throat and he felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He stammered out a response, saying he couldn't let them in, but he could call for help. But the boy didn't seem to hear him. He just kept repeating, "Let us in. We can't come in unless you say it's okay." The air around them grew colder, and Jake could see his own breath misting in the air despite the warmth of his home. He took another step back, reaching for the door to close it, but the girl suddenly leaned forward, pressing her hand against the frame. "Please, you're so cold." Her voice sounded almost desperate now, but Jake could feel something beneath it, something like anger lurking just below the surface. He slammed the door shut, heart racing, and locked it, backing away. But then he heard the boy's voice, clear as a bell, echoing through the door. "You'll regret this." The words sent a shiver down his spine, and he couldn't explain why. He looked through the peephole, but the children were gone, vanished into the darkness like they were never there. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself that he had imagined it all. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought he heard whispering just outside his window, like the murmur of voices carried by the wind. He checked the windows over and over, but there was nothing there. Yet that sense of dread never left him. The next morning he went outside to check for any signs of the kids, footprints, something to prove they had been real. But what he found was far more disturbing. On his doorstep, where the kids had been standing, were 2 pairs of small, wet footprints. But they weren't leading away from the house. They were leading toward it, as if the children had come from inside. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had never seen those footprints the night before. How could that be? That evening, as darkness fell, the power went out. His house was plunged into shadows, and the only light came from the flickering of a candle he had found in the drawer. As he sat in the dim light trying to steady his breathing, there was another knock at the door. Soft, slow, like the night before. He froze, every muscle tensing. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew it was them. He crept to the door, holding his breath, and looked through the peephole. The boy and the girl were back, their black eyes staring directly at him through the glass, even though he knew they couldn't see him. The boy's lips moved, forming words that Jake couldn't hear. But this time, he saw something else. A shadow, just behind them, too tall to belong to either child. A figure standing motionless, its face obscured by darkness. It seemed to lean over the children like a dark guardian, its shape shifting and twisting like smoke. Jake stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest, and the knocking grew louder, more frantic. He grabbed his phone, but there was no signal. Only static, a low buzzing that filled the house. He tried the back door, but it wouldn't open, no matter how hard he pulled. It was like the house had sealed itself shut, and then he heard it, footsteps, inside the house. He turned around, holding the candle high, and caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping past the hallway. He called out, but no voice came out, his throat dry with terror. He followed the shadow, and it led him to the basement door, which now stood slightly ajar. The air coming from below was icy, and he could hear whispers rising from the darkness. He knew he shouldn't go down there, but it was as if he was no longer in control of his own body. He descended the stairs, the candlelight barely pushing back the shadows. At the bottom of the steps, he found old photographs scattered across the floor. They showed children, each with black, empty eyes, standing in front of different houses. Houses he recognized from his own neighborhood. And then he found a photo of himself, standing at his front door, staring back through the peephole, the children with black eyes right behind him. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. But before he could move, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He spun around, but the basement was empty. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, and the whispers grew into laughter, the sound of children echoing through the darkness. Jake tried to run up the stairs, but he felt something tugging him back, pulling him into the shadows. He managed to reach the top and burst through the door, but as he stepped into the living room, he froze. The boy and the girl were standing in the middle of the room, dry as bone, their black eyes fixed on him, with a smile that twisted their faces into something inhuman. Behind them, that shadowy figure loomed, its face just inches from Jake's, eyes like hollow voids. And then, everything went black. When Jake woke up, it was morning. The door was wide open and the house was empty, but on the floor, right where the children had been standing, he found a single, wet footprint, and a photo of his own face, twisted in terror with the words scrawled in black ink, "We'll be back." Jake never spoke about that night again, but every time he hears a knock after dark, he can't help but wonder if they've come back to finish what they started. If you have any horrifying stories, let us know in the comments below, and your story might get featured in the next video. Also subscribe if you want more stories like this.